Warning. The following content may contain elements that are not suitable for some audiences. Viewer discretion is advised.
That disclaimer is getting old, but okay. Good morning, afternoon, and evening, and wherever you are. I'm in a beautiful spot somewhere in this country in a beautiful hotel room, as most of the times. And I want to thank you very much for joining us one more time. I love the comments. I love the feedback that I'm getting. I love the shows that we're producing. We are getting better at this, and we'll eventually get to a good model. But thanks for working with us and providing feedback and comments as we go along. Anyways, thank you very much for joining the last show that we did with Lauren. Garner, incredible feedback and amazing insights. We're going to be, Brent has been putting some of those out. We're going to continue to do that. We're working on a model to distribute that better. And today we have a show that I've been waiting to do for a very long time. And I'm going to do a very short introduction to my guest and co-host, and she can do the part where I don't ruin her reputation. But we're going to talk about charlatans of platitudes. And you probably heard me say this in the last few years more and more. Social networks and the internet gave power and a platform to people that probably shouldn't have power and a platform. They gave them an audience that they probably shouldn't have, where sound bites and platitudes become advice, and that advice is heard by the wrong people who make the wrong decisions based on that. And what this does is it creates two different universes. One, where those people are not listened and good decisions are made. Two, where those people are listening and sometimes bad decisions or bad strategies are cast. So we are trying to find out how is an executive or anybody supposed to navigate this, and what are we going to do? So my co-host for this is the incomparable, inimitable, amazing, outstanding, superb Liz Miller. Liz, do your intro.
What's happening, Esteban, and everyone listening? Hey everyone, Liz Miller, VP and Principal Analyst over at Constellation Research, and a frequent troublemaker with this guy right there. Thanks for having me. Yeah, see, you got to go that way. There we go.
I got this one. Okay, I got to remember that. So you're welcome, and thanks for being here. I was starting to talk, about charlatans of platitude and people that actually make comments and things that they don't know much about, or that they keep repeating sound bites and stuff like that. You've been doing this gig with Constellation for a while. You were the CMO before. You run communities. You've done tons of things. So tell me, how do you feel about this important addition to our,
the charlatans out there. When they first, I can remember, probably 15 years ago, maybe 16 years ago, you would start to see people who would kind of stand up on an invisible soapbox and they would just shout something into the ether, and you'd kind of go, oh, okay. My favorite one, especially being a marketer, was always the CMO job is dead.
Yeah.
They would just shout it into the wind, right? And you'd be like, are you gonna... Are you a CMO? Have you ever worked in corporate America? You would kind of just laugh and walk through the town square and mind your business. But they've gotten louder, and I think that they have found friends who are yeah, that sounds like a really cool thing to yell in the town square. And the sharper and the pithier, the better. I think that the more it's it goes in two ways. The more insane you sound, or the bigger words you use, people are like, ooh, I think I'll stop and listen to you shout about how the death of the CMO is an impending doom upon business because they're the coloring in department and they don't know what they're doing. And most CMOs were like, yeah, I really don't have time to argue with you, charlatan, because I got to go do my job. And so we kind of allowed the noise to keep growing and growing and growing. I think the difference between then and now is exactly what you said, which is the number of people who are copying them. Right? It's they hear a soundbite and they're like, "Ooh, I'm gonna go run and do that," or "I'm gonna run and believe that," without stopping.
The ones that kill me are the people that go "Ooh, that sounds so good. I'm gonna retweet it, repost it, re-exit." I don't know what you do. What do you call it these days? Right? I'm gonna re-exit, and I'm gonna put it out there. And I'm gonna sound smart because I use the same big words, and I found the information, and this is this is something that we started talking about with John Reed a few weeks ago, right? I mean, how do you actually curate the information so it's the right information that permeates to the right people? Because look, for the most part, this is what comes down to. Information is going to find that distribution channel. There's no questions about that.
Yes.
Fortune and force have become, charlatans, fool zones, if you want to call it something, right? And that's like, people are like, oh, I'm a Forbes contributor, I'm a Fortune contributor, I'm a, pick one,
right?
And that's
I went to Harvard. That's
exactly.
the other one, right? Like
I went to Harvard.
I went to Harvard because I took the online night class about how to spell Harvard.
Yeah, exactly.
And you're like, no, like just because you went there and bought a sweatshirt does not mean you actually attended, earned your degree, moved on from there. I think you bring up a really important point of that information will find a way to be disseminated, whether we like it or not, whether it's right or not, right? And I think that what has happened is there has become, it's not this fear of not saying the cool new thing, it's the fear of saying you don't know. And so if you get asked a question, especially executives, I've noted this a lot over like the last year. If you ask an executive a question, back in the day, like back when I was, this is reveal my dirty past. Esteban, I started my career in PR. Like I started as Flack. Don't hate me.
So basically,
back in media training, I grew charlatans for a living, right? Like I fostered charlatans for a living, I feel like. But back in the day, the media training used to be, if you don't know the answer, you say, I don't know. Right? Like if you don't know the answer to a question, the right answer and the only answer is, I don't know, but let me get back to you. Right?
Dude,
and we somehow lost that muscle memory.
Yes, and that's the thing. That's a key part because it got lost, right? It got lost. I mean, media training now doesn't say ever. If you don't know the answer, say I don't know. So it's like, if you don't like the premise. Yeah, I mean, if you don't like the premise, you can like, change the question, right? But that doesn't actually answer the stuff. So but what we have is like these charlatans actually find the audience from people that don't know shit or very little about what they're supposed to know, and they pick up the soundbite and then they go on the media and they say, oh well, Gen AI is going to revolutionize the world. It's not AI is not going to take your job.
It hurts my head. Yeah.
Right. AI is not going to take your job, but somebody who knows AI will. And which means absolutely nothing.
Which part of it? Yeah, which part? Which part of knowing? Yeah, it drives me nuts. But I think there's also, so there's the charlatan, there's the person who's perfectly willing to speak in nonsensical and unprovable sound bites, right?
Yeah.
But I think there's also the people around them that also then create an environment where the charlatan feels that they are saying something that's absolutely right. Because if you construct a room to only have the sycophants in the room that are all like this, you are, oh my gosh, oh my gosh, Gen AI isn't coming for your job. It's those other people. Like if you fill the whole first 3 rows with people that are just like standing, oh my, amazing.
Oh my God, amazing insight. That is a fantastic insight. I was actually looking today. I was looking on LinkedIn this morning and somebody reposted a small clip of Professor Scott Galloway's keynote on storytelling, right? And I respect Scott Galloway. I mean, I'm not going to go either way on whether he's a charlatan or not. The guy has sufficient experience and knowledge. But one of the things that Galloway said that I don't agree with is like, it's not about data, it's about storytelling, which basically says data becomes irrelevant when you have a good story to tell, which I disagree 1000%. But that's what actually powers people that don't know what they're talking about. This is what creates a falsehood, what I call a falsehood, right? There's 2 universes. There's a dichotomy here. One is people that say AI will not take your job. Somebody with AI knowledge will. And then the other universe is people that are saying, okay, less than 5% of people know about AI today. Less than 1% of people are actually using AI. And less than 0.5% of people understand prompt engineering. So I don't know what the fuck you're getting concerned about. And those two, that dichotomy between like the reality and the the charlatanism, that's the problem. That that dichotomy is what creates a void of knowledge and an interest in storytelling. On how to put things together. And the reason that I disagree with Galloway is because it's not that data doesn't matter and storytelling matters. Storytelling with data is what any good fucking executive should be doing today. If you do storytelling just for the sake of telling a story because your PR agency told you to, you're going in the wrong direction. You need the data, you need the case studies, you need the stories, you need to tell. And that's my problem. Is like, the more that we get these charlatans a platform, the less that we have these people making good decisions. And that's the premise that I wanted to create for the show.
I think I do agree with you. I think that to some degree, what ends up happening, I think, especially with, let's kind of pull on the thread of Scott's statement, right? And Scott Galloway. I mean, he's a brilliant guy, right?
Absolutely.
He's done a lot of brilliant things. I have a heck of a lot of respect for the guy, and he is a brilliant storyteller. Like, full stop. He can weave a tale off of a single data point. So to then not to discount the data point from which he wove the story, that's the point at which you become a charlatan, right? Where you don't realize the importance of those things. I think there's another layer to it, though, which I think is that people who don't know him, don't know his body of work, don't know everything, what he truly means by that statement, will reduce it. And I think it's the reductionism that really starts to hurt, right? And makes the charlatan even worse. Like, if you don't realize that everyone's going to reduce what you said to the dumbest possible denominator, right? Yeah. So that everyone walks away from that statement not going, wow, you know what he's saying is, it's not the totality of data and how much data you have. It's about that one really salient data point, and you weave a story from that, around that, bolstering that it's about how you explain the data, so you make the data rich and diverse and meaningful for a business. That becomes important, because that's what he does, right? He doesn't discount the data. He just doesn't stop himself because he hasn't looked at all the data, right? He weaves a story that's then backed up and validated, everything that you said. But what people are going to do is just reduce the statement and just go, my God, it's amazing. Data doesn't matter. They're not even going to take the storytelling part, right? They're just going to take the data doesn't matter. Let's go tell everybody that data doesn't matter. And you know what? Let's go back to the land where advertising does. And you're like, no, that's not what he meant.
But so here's an interesting question. I mean, Alan Bergson, I'm acknowledging that I'm asking interesting questions because I know what I'm talking about, not to look smart. But and here's an interesting question. Is there a value to a charlatan as a canary in a coal mine, or like, a dog? Seriously.
I get what
it's the first person.
Totally.
It's the person that tells you what you should look into, but then it's your job to go and look deeper into that. That's a question that I think that's an interesting question, because there's no value in them for decision making purposes, because you don't have anything, anything on that. But Liz, okay, I'm letting her talk. Okay, come on, somebody give me something. I'm nice here, but. No, I mean, I agree. You're dead on. But the thing is, there a value to a charlatan as being a bird dog? I mean, a canary in a coal mine. Hey, look at this area here.
I don't hate it. Like, I don't hate the idea. I honestly.
Yeah. I mean, do we need to have a conversation of reductionism versus curation, or do we say reductionism is what actually precludes curation?
I think that, like with all things, you have to look at it a little bit. You have to measure that a little bit backwards, right? Because if you can reduce something to its core salient point and make things easier for a larger group of people to understand, so that you can have a better conversation, it's not a bad thing, right? But if it is taken to the extreme and taken to the excess, where now you've taken all meaning out of everything. Right. Remember in the early 90s, everyone ran around quoting that damn book, Who Stole My Cheese? Remember that?
The what? I'm sorry, say again, the last part.
Remember that book, Who Stole My Cheese? Or someone stole
Who moved my cheese? Or whatever. Who moved my cheese?
Who moved my cheese? Who moved my cheese? Right? I can't even remember the name of the damn book.
Yeah,
but remember, everyone used to take random quotes from it, or remember in the early 90s when everyone was running around quoting Peter Drucker, but quoting him incorrectly and totally out of context. But so here's the thing: Peter Drucker, arguably thought leader, brilliant, so many mind-blowing things, right, that you can say about Peter Drucker. But when you reduce him to the platitude that gets put on the motivational poster that someone stuck in their wall in 1997, was like, might put my daily Drucker up on the wall, and this is how I'm gonna manage.
Well, wasn't there a Drucker calendar with like Drucker sales?
Yes, it was called. It was legit called the Daily Drucker, and you would like flip it over and be like, oh my gosh, amazing! Like marketing has a business purpose. Like everyone would step back and up. So when you reduce it that far, you take out all of the actual meaning and the good stuff. But I think this is what I know drives you crazy. I'm doing this just so everyone in your viewing audience can see what happens when Esteban loses his mind. So I'm fairly certain that chandelier is just going to be toast.
Is this where we're going?
It's when people say things like with so much
passion,
like certainty and passion, and they're like,
and
Esteban, you know what's going to change business? When sales, marketing, and CX finally come together. And then, and you have to stand there and you're like,
no. Let me correct you a little bit. Hold on, let me correct. You have to stand there. I don't stand there.
That's
my
true.
reaction is like, what the fuck? No. But anyway, I want to make sure that like if you have any comments and you haven't added them on, please do add them on, right? But Brent is actually making some really good points and goes to exactly what you were saying, right? So the thing is like, does it pay it better? I think that the biggest distinction here is to say that like brilliant people like Scott Galloway, which I agree is a brilliant person, get taken out of context, just like Alan said earlier, right? They get misquoted, and somebody says, "Oh, Scott Galloway said that data doesn't matter," for this, and I'm going like, "No, that's not." I'm pretty damn sure that Scott Galloway never said data doesn't matter. Hey, this is a purpose-built podcast, okay? So I'm pretty sure that Scott Galloway didn't say that, but people like Scott Galloway, people like Liz Miller, people like Alan Bergson, people like Mary and Scott and everybody who's listening give birth to charlatans by making their content available. And when you were saying people used to quote it from books, but they quoted to themselves or their friends or articles that were read by 200 people. Now you get a fucking platform that gives you millions of people listening to what you do. You have people that know absolutely nothing saying stupid things like, this is all management's fault. And with no data or anything.
But it's interesting when you really think about it. Like, yes, I agree with you. I'm not saying that I disagree with you. But like, imagine how many times Mark Twain has been misquoted because of the internet.
The coldest day of my life was a summer day in San Francisco, which he never ever said. He never said that.
Never said it. Right. So it's like, I think that, I do disagree with him, and y'all know that probably better than anyone. But I mean, I think the reality here is that I think you start to get into a really dicey area of like, which came first, the chicken or the egg, right? Like, did misquoting, did charlatans, did the guy standing behind the covered wagon selling snake oil come first, or did that breed of charlatan that's been around since like the dawn of time, did that breed of charlatan get more dangerous because they got social media?
Second one. This is my statement. And I know you and I disagree on many things, but I don't think you can disagree on this. I mean, these people used to be the people that used to be the rock stars and the ninjas and the social mavens of the 2005 and 2010, right? People that are like, social is going to change the world. Everything I do is through social. That's a really good quote. Thank you, Alan. But social is going to. Those people today, on a good day, they're actually senior managers or at the very best a low-level director. Because they had nothing to add to the conversation other than through platitudes, but they were the first ones that paved the way for influencers to become a reality. And then, if you keep following the path, right? Influencers on Twitter, on X, nay Twitter, influencers on X, right? Influencers on Instagram, influencers on TikTok. And then TikTok revolutionized the way that these people get playtime. And then the problem is not this. I mean, look, charlatans existed before, like you said, and they'll exist forever. That's not the problem. The audience and the amplification is not the problem. You know what the problem is? The people that listen to them and actually rely on them and bring them into like, something. I mean, I used to propose to those keynotes, and people would say, oh, you don't have a sufficient audience, so we'll bring XYZ that has like, 20,000 more followers than you do on Twitter.
Yeah.
And I'm like, but he doesn't say anything, or they don't say anything. Sorry, I don't want to name anybody personally, but they don't say anything.
Name.
No. I'm not naming names.
I got real excited about it. I thought we were going that direction.
Hey, if you want you get started. You get started. I'll follow. I have a list for sure.
Nope. I'm not going down.
I know exactly. Look, we do private lashing and public praising. That's
exactly.
my motto.
Exactly.
So, yeah.
But I mean, I think it's this weird thing, because I think there are multiple cultural phenomena that has happened right around the same time, right? That brought charlatans into every facet of our lives. It's not just in business. It's not just, the B2B charlatan. Like we should see if someone will do a quadrant on this, like the B2B charlatan versus the B2C charlatan.
It exists in consumer. It exists in consumer.
Right?
Yeah, exactly. Exists in consumer markets the same way that exists anywhere else. It's not right. A B2B exclusive. Yeah.
You have like many would feel that the Kardashian family is a family of, I don't know, charlatans that started with a sex tape and then went to a reality TV show and then went into products, and now are these kind of multi-millionaire business moguls who have owned parts or shares of a company and then call themselves owners. And I'm like, no, but I designed every single. You didn't design. Come on, like, girl, please. So I mean, you can see these happening in every kind of phase and walk in life, and it's when the idea of influence is equated to how many people clicked a button, we start to get into a really hard area, right? Because there are lots of people in the world of B2B that I look at and I'm like, they got how many people listening to them spew this? What in the heck is going on? And the same thing with the Kardashians, right?
Yeah.
1 billion people follow them and they're like, well, they must be right, because they just said that, eating a squirrel tail is going to somehow make me a multimillionaire. I gotta find me a squirrel tail. Like, it's this weird thing that's going on. But I think that to the earlier point, and I think that Brent might have posted it, how do you get them out? And like, how do you start to weed them out of the organization in that B2B space? I am going back to varmints because it's my favorite place to go. I'd be glad I didn't mention a raccoon. But when it comes about, like, how do we push them? Right.
Yeah,
how do you emphasize the charlatan? The question then becomes, I think the bigger question is, how do you identify the charlatan? Because I think a lot of times within an organization, but it is it? Because within an organization, charlatans breed more charlatans. If you have,
hold on.
Okay, we can all think of a very large organizations that maybe at the very tippy top of that organization has someone who maybe leans to the side of charlatanism, right? And all of a sudden, everyone's like, that's a great place to go. We should run and chase that. And now you've bread. It's like water on a gremlin.
But this goes back to the question: how do you exercise them from the organization? But more than that is, how do you actually identify within the organization the people that only listen to charlatans? And I think that, I mean, the conversation that we're having is very interesting, because it's like, number one, are they really an early indicator, of something to come, because they were able to spot something, that most people wouldn't have read because it was complicated, and reduce it, like you said, reductionism, and then put it out there in a soundbite that was picked up by people that then created a conversation. I'm totally in favor of that. Seriously, I am. But that's the thing. That's where it dies. The conversation shouldn't have any charlatans in it. If you're going to have an internal conversation or an external conversation to deal with the topic, right? Then there's no value in having charlatan at that point, because now you're actually getting into like decision making. Now you're actually getting into strategy setting. Now you're actually getting into vision setting. You get into things that actually have an influence and an impact, a true impact on the organization. I mean, this is one of the differences between the B2B and the B2C market. In a B2C market, most of the products are so cheap and easy that it doesn't matter. In a B2B world, you're married to 20 years for whatever the fuck you purchase. If it's based on charlatanism, that's a problem.
Well, so I guess here's my question for you. Has charlatanism killed thought leadership?
Thought leadership, but died by itself, and charlatans stepped in to take the place. And Now we go to the drinking.
Well, and did it kill it? Well, yeah, right. Because like
no, but
actual real thought leaders, we used to have them.
We used to have them, and this is okay. So now we go to the drinking game, Brent. When I was a gardener, but when I was a gardener, but this is actually an interesting point, because when I was a gardener, I was part of the few people that actually wanted to create blogs and wanted to create like quick to market information and content, because to put a note out takes like months, to be fair, right? It's still today, I'm not sure today for sure, but still today it takes more than it should. So I wanted to create quick blogs and put the information out there, and then went through the whole discussion. So I mean, did charlatanism kill thought leadership? No, thought leadership died because the new medium that replaced it makes it so easy for anybody to gain quick notoriety and be like the person that everybody follows and such and such. I mean, what were the names?
I don't know. Anyways. Hey, Brett, tee it up, buddy. I'm about to disagree with Esteban, but only slightly, because I'm going to actually move the point at which thought leadership started to die up a little bit. I don't necessarily think it's just because of the channel that the information got disseminated with. I think it became everyone decided to call themselves a thought leader. Right? And when you call yourself a thought leader, you're inherently not a freaking thought leader.
Fuck,
right?
If you call, yes, 1,000, that is the statement of the century. I never called myself a thought leader. When people tell me I'm a thought leader, I said, I don't know what the fuck that means. And yet they continue to give me the label. I'm not a thought leader. I'm just a thinking person that writes. And that's the difference.
You're a leader. I'm not an influencer. But it might not be.
But Liz, you're not an influencer. Liz, you're not an influencer. Liz, you're not a thought leader. You know what you are? You're an experienced, wise executive that is willing to put your ideas out there to lead conversations. So if you want to call me anything that is interesting, call me a conversation leader. I'm fine with that.
But I also think thought leader, a thought leader or thought leadership, if you want to call the idea thought leadership, it has to stand the test of time. That's the part that everyone conveniently drops off, right? If you were to try to define it, right? It's a unique idea that stands the test of time. Me going to work and saying the internet turned on today, not a thought leader. Right? like, hey, the clouds.
Yeah, but you going on X and saying, oh, the rebrand from Twitter to X is going to help X position itself as the destination of choice for influencers. That is going to label you a thought leader, even though there's absolutely no data behind it, no thought.
God.
But that's what happens.
Though.
This is the problem.
Of course it's what happens, right? But I also do think it goes back to, are we conflating all of these words when what you and I are both really trying to say is everyone stop being lazy and actually want to have a conversation. Because I think right now there's also this element of people don't want to have a conversation around it because they all think a conversation is an argument. I always tell the story of the time you and I first met. Okay. Yeah. When you and I first met, it was on stage at Constellation CCE. It was before I joined the organization. It was 2018, and there was a panel about marketing. And you said something, and I think I could probably go find it on film. I think I turned and looked at you and just went.
You did.
And yes, you did. You and I.
It was a constellation. I remember that. Yeah, I remember that. Like CCE, and everybody got out of the way.
Everyone was like, oh shit! Like you could see the other panelists. Like you saw everyone's like chairs moving back, and you and I. And I was like, no, that's completely wrong. That's not how that's going to happen. You're like, that's totally how it happened. And you and I just kept having the conversation. And it was funny because you and I got off stage and you turned around to me and like, I'm Esteban. I'm like, I'm Liz. I think we hugged and went drinking. Like I really, I think, because it was the start of a really great conversation. But everyone came up to me for the rest of the 2 days and they're like,
me too. Me too, by the way. Yeah.
Are you? Yeah. Well,
are you okay with Liz?
Are you okay?
Well, people like you better, but that's it. Yeah.
And I'm like, what do you mean? Am I okay? And they're like, with Esteban, he really attacked you. I'm like, when? Like I was literally like, oh my God, did I miss it? Did he like jump? And I like thought, because I think people misunderstand people who want to have a conversation because it matters to them, as opposed to people who just want to argue every point. Yeah. You and I were having a conversation that mattered to the both of us, and we were enjoying the conversation, which I think people really, really misunderstand. Yeah. And so I think people are just terrified of having a conversation because You don't want to turn into a fight. You don't want to have it turn into a debate. You just want to make an easy decision. And I do think a large part of how charlatanism grows and how the charlatan becomes the most important voice at the table is because either half the room's too lazy to call bullshit, or half the room's like, I do not want to get into it. So the charlatan lives.
Yes, but so here's a trying to move this forward because I have the responsibility. I don't disagree with anything you said, but here's one of the reasons that I wanted to talk to you about this, right? When charlatanism becomes marketing, see the quotation mark, air quotes, okay, marketing, right? When people call charlatanism marketing, when people say, "Oh, product marketing is about like distributing the sound bites and like correlating to my brand and all that," right? So this is a two-side problem, in my opinion. I would love to get your opinion. This is a two-side problem. Number one, when charlatanism becomes marketing, the audience gets the wrong idea about the brand idea, the message, the promise, whatever you want to call it, right? But number two, when charlatanism becomes marketing, then the people making the decisions notice charlatanism more than they notice thought leadership, or whatever you want to call it, a conversation or whatever.
Yeah.
And you spend more time at the decision point for executives making decisions on technologies than I do these days. So do you see this becoming an issue? I mean, is this becoming an issue for people making decisions that like marketing replaces knowledge and whatnot?
Yeah, it is. It is, and it's exceedingly frustrating. I think that it's happening in spaces and places that have kind of become overly commoditized, and in technologies that have become really commoditized. So we're trying to find anything exciting to say about marketing automation. Okay, marketing automation technologies, there's not a whole lot of like, oh my God, revolutionary stuff. Like, we're seeing incremental changes and incremental improvements, but we're not seeing a radical transformation. And so what do? We talk about things like they're a radical transformation, and the charlatanism begins, right? And I think that the reality becomes, you end up with two factions from that charlatanism in the buyer's community. You end up with the people who just fall like head first into the puddle of mud, and they're like, oh, I totally need Gen AI writing all of my emails because then they're going to be perfect.
Did you have to bring Jenna?
Did you just
say? Did you have to bring Jennifer into the conversation?
Let's talk about the charlatanism, right? Like, everyone believes that statement of like, oh my God, it's finally the magic Swiss Army knife silver bullet that's going to cure all of my ills, right? So I'm going to train this AI on all of the other bad emails that have ever been written, and we're going to somehow generate a faster, better, terrible email.
So how do you differentiate? Since you brought Jenny to the conversation, well, I can't say Jenny because that's Alan will get upset. But since you brought Jennifer into the conversation, right?
Yeah.
So how do you differentiate? And this is something that we talk about a little bit with John Reed also. It's like, how do you differentiate charlatanism from GAI created content? Because that's what it is, basically. It's like we automated charlatanism when we created generative AI.
I don't think that's necessarily what we did, to be very honest. I think that I think that we automated mediocrity. I don't think we automated charlatanism.
What's the difference?
Because there's nothing, there's really no value or promise or really anything in a lot of the things that Gen AI, especially from a written content email perspective, that's like necessarily new. Like, listen, I think Gen AI and a lot of the tools and a lot of the models out there are actually really cool. Actually really like them. I'd really like to see them succeed. Do I think that they're a magic silver bullet that automatically poof, just magically happen? No, that, right? Shit's got to be trained. You got to know what the hell you're doing when you drive that car. But
that's not where we are.
That's not where we are.
I was having a conversation yesterday, and the way that I look at Gen AI is like, I tell my kid, okay, here's a chicken breast, some potatoes, and now go make a meal. And my kid is like, but Dad, I'm only 5. I said, well, that's not an issue. I give you everything you need.
It's right. No, it's people have long believed, and people really think that every new technology is like a Ron Popeil chicken machine, right? Remember that guy? Set it and forget it. Set it and forget it. And so they think that's with all the technology, but they forget that there was a staff out back that like patted that damn chicken down with all the spices to get it to even remotely look cooked, right? So it's like the charlatanism, again, not new. What I think is new here, and when you say how are buyers looking at this, the fatigue sets in faster. I think because of social, yes, charlatanism rises that much faster, but the fatigue from all the BS also rises just as fast. And so you all of a sudden start to see people being like, I'm not going to implement that. You see CIOs saying it right now. I'm not putting that in. You want to run around and test it in a cute little department? Great. Go around and test it. You want to test it to find out when you should send out your bad email? Go do it. Have at it. You want to create, so there is the rise of the fatigue that comes with charlatanism is also coming faster. And I think that it's the fatigue that we have to, I'm actually more concerned about the fatigue, to be honest with you, because the fatigue is going to, the fatigue over whatever the charlatan statement is happens really fast, but it's also pretty definitive, right? So all of a sudden
we had, look, recent history, we had the most blatant example of charlatanism going wrong. Before COVID, everybody said, oh, if you don't create a digital version for your enterprise, you're going to go out of business in like no time. Guess what? Here comes COVID and you need to be digital and you're not. And oh my God, you survived. What am I going to say?
What?
Now? Right?
Yeah. You didn't have to move everything to the cloud in 30 days? What?
Right.
Yeah.
Right. So then that's like an example of charlatanism going wrong. And that actually fuels.
And it goes wrong.
In my experience, that's what's fueling executives getting tired of charlatanisms, but yet still exists. Yeah. And this is the part where
charlatanism will move. Charlatanism will always exist. There's no way that and that's why I say I'm more afraid of the fatigue than I am of the charlatan, because the fatigue brings on the worst decision. Yes, it's a bad decision if you believe the charlatan. It's a bad decision if you sat there and one day if you're a CEO and you turn to your CIO in the middle and said, oh my God, we have to transform in 30 days and completely be in the cloud. We can't have anything anywhere but in the cloud. It's the only place we're going to be or we're going to die, right? And then you hit that fatigue point and now you're like, well, I didn't die. So you know what? F it. I don't need to move anything to the cloud. I don't need to look at any of these new solutions. I don't need to look at public cloud to have all my data and make sure that my AI actually has a knowledge model large enough to actually create anything substantive or useful for my business. Nah, whatever. Just put it on someone's PC. Sure, it'll be fine. Because remember, I didn't die the last time I believed that charlatan. So it's the fatigue. And it's the next decision that I'm worried about. The charlatan's going to be a charlatan. Like, you can't knock him off the box.
So then, hey, Brent, if you can put the last comment that Mary put out there before she left, right? So then the question is, do we need a new process, or do we need to find a way to drive the charlatans and the charlatanism out of the process that we have today? And this is a very interesting question because, processes take forever to actually do. Thank you, I know that. Yeah, you see, Alan, and make good questions. But do we need a new process for decision making, or do we need a way to drive, like Mary said, drive the charlatans out of the equation? And I have my answer, but I would love to get your answer.
I think that we probably need a little of both, but I also think that we need to be within organizations. We need to empower a different person. We need to invoke the Esteban Act within our teams, right? I'm just going to go ahead and call it. I'm going to name it after you, right? I think that a lot of times within organizations, when a charlatan starts speaking, the person who's the first to stand up and be like, I actually don't agree with that. Wait a minute. I think that's wrong. That person makes everyone uncomfortable. But that person is what's going to not only take whatever the charlatan said and either extract the truth from it and make that the usable piece of information that we carry on, or they're going to drum the charlatan out. Because everyone's going to go, I actually agree with that person. Now that I've stopped being uncomfortable, right? I actually agree with that person. So I think that as leaders, and I would say anyone listening to this who has a team, don't immediately have that knee-jerk reaction of drown out the first person who disagrees with the charlatan or disagrees with the comment. I think there's a very big difference between someone who's being contrary for the sake of being contrary, right? Like the contrarian's not helpful. But the person who's like, wait a minute, like I got some serious questions here. Don't force that person to sit down. In fact, empower that person to have a deeper conversation and maybe host the next dialogue.
So as a your role for the longest time was basically you were like, the trainer or the leader, the advisor to the leaders, whatever role you want to call for yourself, right? The maker. You were the queen maker for CMOs.
The CMO of CMOs. It was
the
very
CMO maker,
job,
right?
yes.
But that was your job, and this is why you're speaking to this with authority. But then, what can you do to first identify the leader that needs to empower that person, and then what would you say to that leader about how to empower that person? Because I agree with you 6,000,000%. Seriously, this is, if any company were to have, any team, not any company, because it's going to be more than one, but if any team were to have one person that is a charlatan defeating, right? The slayer of charlatans, first of his name, right? So Ferdinand the First, the charlatan slayer, first of his name. But if you were to empower the charlatan, identify and empower the charlatan slayer in your teams, what would you tell to that leader? And who's that leader, if you want to go there? But if not, what would you tell to that leader to do to actually begin to empower those charlatan slayers?
I think the first thing is to remind that leader that curiosity can actually be put to work. I think that a lot of times what charlatan slayers usually have in common is they're intensely curious and willing to ask different questions. And they're not necessarily even asking questions that they feel that they are right about. Right. I think that people who are curious and people who are going to be the charlatan slayers are the ones who are also interrogating data differently. They're the ones who are willing to go into the campaign teardown and be like, yeah, I built that campaign, but I'm the first one to rip it off the wall. Right. These are people who are intensely curious. And I think that when we talk about leadership and when we talk about hiring, and I think this is especially true across CX teams, and honest to God, like how you and I define CX, not how weirdos define it, right? But like across the entirety of that ecosystem.
Let's expand it to the organization. I don't think it changes across
the whole organization. No, I think you're right. Yeah, you're right.
Yeah.
I think, anytime you are hiring, you want to have those people and you want to have a mix of people, right? You can't have everyone who's a question asker. Like that's a horrible team mix, right? But you need to have someone who is willing to ask the question and willing to be wrong and has the capacity to admit, yeah, okay, I know I started there, but I agree with you now, right? Because that is the person who is going to ask the charlatan the hard question, but that's also the person that once that presentation is over, right? Let's say you brought someone in for an SKO, you brought your thought leader in for your SKO and you had them to give the presentation and everyone goes back and it's like, wow, that was so insightful. And there's that one person that's like, was it? How do you empower that person to then have a team huddle afterwards and have that conversation? It's about intense curiosity, because intense curiosity is going to pull the curtain back on the charlatan.
Okay.
Scott, Scott, watch out about performing the Esteban act. It can hurt you. I'm just gonna it can, pull something out.
But so here's something that here's a side item, right? I used to be terrified of going against people like you because I've been offered the role of CMO. No, I'm not serious, but this is why. Because I've been offered the role of CMO many times in my life, in my career, I never took it. But somebody like you, that not only you were a CMO, but you were the CMO whisperer, right? You were the person who makes CMOs and like rainmakes on CMOs. Somebody like you talking about marketing, it's absolutely fucking terrifying. If I'm the incarnation of the Esteban act, and yet I get into places where I'm not supposed to be. So how do you actually make somebody like me, and I'll give you my experience, but how do you make somebody like me not be afraid to express their but was it? Because that's a great question. But was it? It's a charlatan slayer. But how do you empower somebody to actually ask the questions in places where they may be outranked, or out-titled, or outpowered, or something like that? I mean, look, I'm not terrified of you anymore. I'm just scared now. But I can deal with you.
As one should be, but because I'm nuts. But we talk about the farmers.
Yeah. Besides, you know people that can beat the shit out of me in 3 seconds anyway. So but seriously,
I think it's such a great question. I love the question, Esteban. I really do, because I think that for all of the chatter about executive leadership that we've all been through, I mean, everyone watching this, we've had to take one of those classes or we've had to take a profile or whatever. I think the thing we often forget is it's not necessarily about some big thing that you do. I think that empowerment sometimes comes down to a little thing you can do, which is if you are looking out at your team and you've got that person that's asking the funky question, you've got the person that's constantly coming back with the thing, have a meeting. Honestly, that's what I used to do with my team, right? Whatever team I was running, if I had that one person who was asking a question, I'd be like, okay, let me figure this out. Is this someone who's asking a question to really get to a new answer and is authentic? The way you ask questions is different from someone who just wants to be a contrarian. As a leader, you have to sit down with both of those people and figure that out. The person who's just being contrary for the sake of being contrary, like push them to the side, give them a different job. The person who is asking legitimate questions because they are thinking these things through, they are thinking towards better, give them another job that actually takes that question and lets them create better. You got to put that person to work. You got to put that curiosity to work. But I think people are so scared of it. People are so scared of it going like, oh God, but if he's right, if we ask the question and he's right, does that prove that all the other things I did was wrong? You're not.
I don't give a shit about that. I mean, I've been saying from the beginning of my career.
Do.
But I've been saying from the beginning of my career to anybody that I talk to, I invite you to prove me wrong. Actually, I want you to prove me wrong. I'm full of it. I just, whatever I say, I'm full of shit. Prove me wrong. Right. Because then what it does, the process is much more interesting than the fame or recognition that I would get.
Right. But you're honest about it. And that's what I'm saying is that is someone sitting down with you and actually will sit and listen and hear you out. Very quickly, you start to understand, wait a minute, this guy isn't asking a question to do something to me or to prove me wrong or to make me look bad. He's actually asking an earnest question because he wants to go through the thought process. That's the difference, right? And I think the thing, what it oftentimes boils down to is what kind of leader are you? And I was very fortunate very early on in my career that I worked for someone and his assistant. I'll never forget when I asked his assistant why I never heard him speak above a whisper. Like he was like this, like all the time, just like stuff like this. And I was like, Miss Charlene, why does he talk? Like, I can't hear him. And she looked at me and said, it will stick with me forever. A lion never needs to roar to prove he's a lion.
That's right. 1000%.
Right?
I know, by the way, I know who you're speaking.
Will always roar.
I know who you're speaking of, and that makes it so much more valuable as a story, but I'm not going to ask you to say something you don't want to. But I mean, knowing who it is makes it like 1,000 times more valuable as a story. But I'm not saying that you have to do so. But that's true. I mean, you don't need to be loud to be heard. You just need to have. You know what? This brings me a great idea. I'm gonna create the Esteban Academy with Esteban 101 and Esteban 102 courses.
Oh my God!
I'm gonna crank out the Esteban Act in scale everywhere that we go. There's gonna be an Esteban. You know.
Oh so, God! But here's the thing. I think here's the thing, though. I think that okay. The reason why I'm going to tell you not to do that is that also becomes part of the problem.
I would never do that, dude.
Right? I know you.
I got plenty going on, as you well know.
You got enough going on. But I think that people do think that they can go take a leadership class. I'm gonna go take a class. I'm gonna go to Toastmasters to figure out how I can run a table. And they think that will turn them into a leader of any kind, of thought, of culture, of an organization. I don't care what they want to be. But they somehow think that that's going to do it because they command a presence. And it's like, here's what I will say. Listen, I know I'm loud. I know it. I'm freaking loud. I'm a loudmouth. I'm loud. I will be the life of the weirdest party. I will go say hi to random strangers in a casino. I get that about myself. But I also know that the most impactful people about thought in my life that I have listened to and really listened to and really taken insight from and tried to kind of internalize and emulate that have been the people who got real quiet real fast. You do that. And that's the class that I would teach. If there was a class, if I was to take this moment and say, here's my master class on how to ask questions like Esteban, like ask questions like a boss. You can be loud. You can be, that's not right. That's not right. And then all of a sudden Esteban comes in with the comment. Every single time, that's what you do. But that is the thing to look for. If you're looking for the tips of the charlatans are always screaming. They're always yelling, and they yell the same thing with the same deck, with the same, it is the same thing. I guarantee you, go back and look at a charlatans conversation from 10 years ago. It is the same exact thing. Maybe different graphics, They might have switched out 5 words.
There you go. You can use a really small font, yes, to be very quiet. But it's not.
Yes.
It's not
only
the volume.
you,
I mean,
Matthew. Only you.
only you. But it's not. You know what? It's not the volume. It's the, like, you know, like you said, it's the quietness, right? Look, I'm like you. I'm a loudmouth. I can speak forever. I can shut anybody up. I can express an opinion and passionately defend it to the point that people will believe that the earth is flat. You know, I can do that. I don't want to do that, but I can do that. But it's like you said, it's like when the tone changes, that's when you go like, okay, now this is something I should listen to, right? Because yes, I agree, a lion never needs to roar to show that they're a lion, but once in a while you need to roar for people to know that you're not a pushover, right?
Right. And people who are Welsh can use small fonts. This is what we've learned from today's episode.
So we got about 10 minutes. We got about 10 minutes left, and I want to start bringing this somewhere, right? So we cover a lot of things here, but like the question that remains, there's some, you know, we got some amazing clips, by the way, you know, that I'm going to go through later. But the question that remains on this, and that where we started all this, it's not whether they exist, it's not whether they're part of the process or whatever, right? So yes, I agree, Alan, 1,000%. But it's not that. The question that remains is like, you know, and this is what I would love for you to take, like, you know, a couple minutes and create, like, you know, your mind framework of how to solve this question.
Yeah.
We cannot ignore them. We cannot accept them. We cannot find them and empower the anti-charlatan, you know, that easily. Knowing the process that exists today and where we are, what would you tell a leader to do in respects to the information that you need to collect to make a decision, and then how to use that information to make the decision? That's it.
I think that when it comes to decision making, you have to be your own best researcher. You have to, you know, that's when, yes, peers matter. I think when it's coming and speaking and asking questions matters. I've always found the litmus test when executives are making a decision, even when I was making executive decisions about whether it was like a technology to buy or what to do, if I thought I could paint it on the break room wall, probably wasn't something I needed to make a decision with. Right? Like if it sounded...
Say it again.
With
different words.
Yeah, if someone was selling me something and it started to sound like something that I would take a stencil and paint onto the break room wall, right? Mm-hmm. Like if it sounded like, oh, the world is changing and we're here with it, and blah, like all that, I'd be like, wow, that's a really inspirational conversation. So much to the point where my teams understood that when I said that's really fancy or that's an inspirational conversation, that they knew I wasn't buying it. So I say it all the time. Those are my two catchphrases with my teams. But I think there is a real responsibility of executives and of leaders today to take upon themselves the research that's required to ask better questions. It's not even about making better decisions. Don't start with something that big. I think when you say you've got to make a better decision, that feels really big. I think that if you can start smaller and say, ask a better question, that gives yourself permission to, in the middle of a sales pitch, in the middle of a presentation, in the middle of a user group convention, to step back and say, wow, 5 people have said the exact same thing and they all come from different companies and all say they have different titles. That feels weird. Because if it feels weird, it probably is weird, you know? So I think we have to stop ignoring that little voice in the back of our head that says, something doesn't quite feel right about this, and ask the question. We don't have to run away from it screaming. We don't have to be that dramatic, but we have to ask that question, because we're getting into a point, especially around business, where the decisions that we make can either inflate our bad decisions to where we are now actually having to fire people because we made really bad decisions earlier, right? Or we're in a growth mode. I think we've seen a lot of companies hit that, especially when we've come out of the pandemic, and we can't afford to do that, right? These are people's lives we're talking about. So I think that we have to get to a point where we can ask that question and not brush off that inner voice that says, wow, that sounds like someone read that on a Hallmark card.
So build a good team, have the internal conversations, and empower all your team to ask the right question, basically.
And you know what? Start with yourself. I think that's a big problem. I think that we when we talk about empowerment, we are talking about someone else. Like, how do I empower the person who's going to ask the better question? Empower your damn self to ask a question, right? Like, as a leader, your job isn't to just sit there and be like, yes, I believe every single thing that someone sent me in a white paper. It's a PDF. It must be true.
So,
right? That's what people do.
I'm not disagreeing.
It's
I'm just trying to
a pre-generated social card. Wow. It's a branded social card. It looks nice. It must be accurate. Like, ask a question. Like, take a beat. Ask a question.
Yep. That's actually going to be your tagline. Empower your damn self to ask a question. Liz Miller, empower yourself
Esteban.
to ask a damn question.
Yeah.
Anyways, we got a couple of minutes. So, like, there's two things I want to do. I think that this was fantastic, and we'll get a lot of really good clips. And I wish we could keep going because there's a lot more than we'll keep talking about it, right? But one thing I want to do, number one, is I want to recognize a friend of mine and yours also, Mr. Alan Bergson, who's in the audience today, who ever since I met him, he's been telling me, I ask my kids the same question every day. Did you ask any good questions today? Not did you go to school, not did you learn, but did you ask any good questions today? So I want to recognize that because, Alan is the empowerment of asking good questions. And the last one, talking about questions, ask me a question.
I'm going to ask you a question.
Doesn't have to be about the topic. Anything that you think that could either add or just anything at all.
Can you remember a time where you fell for a charlatan? Where you didn't realize that was a charlatan until like afterwards, and you were like, oh, and it can't be someone you married or someone you divorced. No. Don't make a joke about that.
No, actually, this is what I'm going to do. I'm going to do you one better. I'm going to tell you the first time that I had the epiphany on how not to be a charlatan. Okay.
Oh, good one.
So this is a story that happened to me when Windows 3.1. I know for all those kids out there that don't know this, we had Windows 3.0 and 3.1. But when Windows 3.1 first came out, there was a huge debate about multitasking, right? Because everybody kept saying, "Oh, it allows you to multitask." You remember this, right? Technologically speaking, it would not allow you to multitask because what it did is it's something that is called stateless multitasking, which means we take what is running and keep it in storage until we need it again, but it's not running in the background, which would be true multitasking, right? And I was actually having a discussion with an executive team. I was a consultant at the time, and I was having a discussion with the executive team about whether or not to adopt the Windows 3.1. And like you said, I'm a curious guy. I read a lot. I had a lot of things to share, right? And I put all this stuff together in my mind. I started like correlating all the points and everything, but I never actually said this out loud. Where we're talking about it, and everybody's arguing, and I'm saying, it is multitasking. And they're like, no, it's not. It's not. And finally I said, look, this is what it is. It multitask in a different way that you think about multitasking. It actually has, and I listed all the technologies and listed all the components and what it does. Said this is the model that you're actually looking for. If you don't embrace this, you're not going to get what you need out of this. So if you think that we're going to continue this debate forever, we're never going to get anywhere. I shut up. Nobody said anything for 30 seconds. And then one of the executives got up and said, this is a good time to wrap it up. And then they made the decision to go with Windows 3.1. That's when I realized that the value is not in actually embracing the discussion and making the point, but having the data, having the statements, put it all together, and then Charlie Vankowski, funny. That's funny. That's funny, Brent. I'm not talking to you ever again. But that's the moment that I realized that you can go, if you want to have value, add value to the conversation, cannot be as a charlatan repeating the thing that everybody talks about, but you need to go dig deeper, find the information, and then bring it to the conversation.
Listen, there's a use for snake oil somewhere. It's just not necessarily what everyone's selling it for, right? So I think there's somebody
sent me once a picture of the internet. I mean, before we have memes, we have pictures, right? GIFs and GIFs and all that stuff. And somebody sent me once a GIF that said Dr. Esteban snake oil. There was a snake oil salesman with like the little portfolio there.
Right. So everyone accuses me of selling icebergs to Eskimos. So
yeah. So anyways, we are out of time. Perfectly on time. 30 seconds to go. Anything else you want to add?
I want to say thank you. I had fun. Hope everyone else had a good time.
And Liz Miller, the value proposition for this conversation. Thank you so much. Great job as always. Next week, we're talking to Alan Bergson. We're going to talk about
yes!
content and scale. It's going to be a really interesting conversation.
His conversations around storytelling, that's not to be missed. That's not to be missed at all.
Right? Yeah. So anyways, thank you very much. We'll see you next week, and we'll keep going on this, and we'll see you soon. Thanks, Liz.